Now, specifically, you're known for not only, but particularly known for your work on business wargaming. Jan, is business war? Is business war? In this episode, I speak with Professor Dr. Jan Oliver Schwarz, a professor and member of the World Economic Forum, about business wargaming. So we explore how it works, its benefits, and what the Swissair failure actually has to do with it. Let's go. Jan, you showed me an article from Nature from 2020 entitled "The Problem with Pandemic Planning." And the article was in the context of business wargaming, foresighting, predicting, and these areas. And the article says, and I'm quoting from the article, 2 decades of war game scenarios predicted leaky travel bans, a scramble for vaccines, and disputes between state and federal leaders, but none predicted Donald Trump. So what exactly is it that no one was able to predict about Trump?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would be a bit uncomfortable with the term prediction because that kind of indicates that we can predict the future. I think rather what this points out to that is maybe that 20 years of wargaming helped to fairly well anticipate what happens with such a pandemic and what is involved. But that somebody like Donald Trump being in a way dysfunctional in dealing with the crisis couldn't be anticipated. And that, of course, kind of hints to one predominantly theme within foresight that we cannot by 100% accuracy predict anything, but that we probably have tools that help us to anticipate fairly well what could happen. And back then, probably when those war games were evolving, nobody could imagine somebody like Donald Trump being in the White House.
And this is without any evaluation of him being in the White House is good or bad. It's just interesting to understand this from a business wargaming and also strategic perspective. Tell me a little bit more about your background. So you're a professor of strategic foresight and trend analysis, and you're also the head of the Bavarian Foresight Institute at the Technical University of Ingolstadt in Germany, Europe. And you're also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Foresight Network. Mm-hmm. So your scientific background goes back to early studies, including future studies and master program, PhD at the intersection of management and foresight. So there is a lot of background. And of all of these research areas you could have chosen, why strategic foresight?
I think this, in a way, goes back to probably, to be honest, over 20 years with an internship I did with back then Deutsche Bank in a department that was experimenting with what they back then called strategic early warning systems, and I found this idea totally fascinating to try to find an approach to early understand what is happening around an organization, to give an organization time to react properly. And then really thinking about, well, how could the future evolve? And I think one of the fascinating things that still stays with me is that the future is so relevant for us as humans, as organizations. We constantly make decisions about the future. And it is still something which we can't really grasp. It is nothing we can put on the table. And I think this is something that I still find really fascinating. On the one hand side, that relevance, and on the other hand, the difficulty in a way of dealing with it as an individual or an organization. And that's what I still find in a way fascinating about the field of futures and foresight.
Now, specifically, you're known for not only, but particularly known for your work on business wargaming. Jan, is business war?
No, not predominantly. I mean, the term comes from military wargaming. It depends on the industry you're in. I think often business leaders experiencing competition as being something very brutal when they fight over market shares, when they are in an industry which in a way might not be growing at a high rate or even declining. Um, I'm not quite sure if they would all perceive it as war, but that competition being something in a way sometimes brutal that you need to deal with. However, and maybe we'll talk also about that, wargaming also has those aspects of understanding how to cooperate with others. So it's not only just about war.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, the name kind of is there for a reason, right? So for those that are not familiar with it, can you maybe explain what business wargaming is and where it actually comes
Yeah.
from?
I mean, it comes from the military. And it probably goes back in history, back to ancient Greek times when military leaders tried to understand, when I do this or that, what will my opponent do? And this has been ever since something which has been or still being used in the military to train military officers, but also to understand or trying to anticipate what could be situations within military interactions. And in a way, this idea has been adopted into a business context, and then kind of that just the term business has been added to wargaming. I mean, predominantly, a business wargaming is a role playing situation of in a business context of a dynamic business situation. So managers stepping into the shoes of maybe their competitors and trying to understand and trying to anticipate how the future of their industry could evolve.
And so, in what situation do you find business wargaming to be most useful?
Um, I would argue that nowadays, where pretty much every industry is under pressure in terms of changes, transformation, um, that probably all, in a way, industries are kind of are forced into a way to think about how could the future evolve. And it then is in a way maybe that you have different approaches to how to use a business war game. For instance, in an industry which is declining, the aim of a war game probably would be more about fighting about existing market shares, thinking about M&A activities. If I'm in an industry
Mhm.
which is growing, it is probably more finding about cooperation partners, or thinking about innovations. Um, but predominantly, I would argue that it is useful if questions arise like, how will my competitors act and react in the future? Do I see new competitors coming into the game? How will they act and react? And maybe overall, what are the most likely dynamics in my industry?
So let's walk through some of the mechanics
Mhm.
of a typical business war game. So how can I imagine a game to look
Mhm.
like? Is this a group of managers in a room, just battling each other? Probably not, right? So what is the process? How long do you play it? Who's playing? Are there some rules? How does a typical business war game,
Mhm.
if there is a typical business war game, look like?
Well, I would argue in a way that the structure usually is the same. It actually starts with a research phase. So really thinking
Mhm.
about what do I have in terms of available knowledge on my industry? Do I have trends available, maybe scenarios already, how the industry could further develop? And then it is really about understanding as best possible my competitors. So really doing competitor analysis, having comparable data that can get in a way very complicated if I try to simulate competitors which, for instance, are not stock listed, which do not have certain
Mhm.
reporting requirements. It also gets more and more complicated to understand, for instance, what is the culture of an organization? How do they make decisions? What maybe are their core competencies beyond just the tangible resources? And then it is usually it is a one-day workshop. So you bring together something like 30 managers, and I'll use as an example in Ingolstadt my neighbor Audi. So for instance, you bring together like 30 managers from Audi, and one group of those managers will represent Audi in the simulation, and others will represent their core competitors like
Okay. Uh-huh.
Mercedes or BMW or
Mhm.
Tesla, or somebody else
Or
can also be a
yeah.
software solution provider. And then those managers assigned to these groups, and they have kind of the analytical material available, that what we call a game book, so that they can kind of immerse into that role. There also will be a team representing customers, also usually assigned to with managers from the company. And then usually the task is to think about, how would you position the company you're representing in the next 2 or 3 years, like, starting with a smaller time horizon. And you come up maybe with a strategy, a product offering, service offering, and you present that to the market and customer team. And then you kind of go into the second step, which is then further into the future. And so you learned about what your competitors are doing. You receive feedback from the market and customer team. And you also then need to take in consideration that, trends are evolving. You're moving further
Mhm.
into the
Mhm.
future. And then you come up again with something, strategy, product offering, and so forth. Present that again to the market and customer team, and then usually go into a third move, which then even goes further into the future, maybe beyond the usual planning horizon and so forth. And those are, in a way, the iterations that you have. And at the end, that group of managers then comes back together and can kind of share the experiences they had with looking at their industry, but also the company they work for from different perspectives, and kind of
Mhm.
share those insights, and then maybe really get into the concrete questions of what have we learned, what do we need to do.
And how good are the managers of one company, say Audi, in pretending they're actually managers from a competitor? Because there is a lot of assumptions involved, right? They need to kind of learn and assume in a very short amount of time in the game book, for example. How would other managers take
Yeah.
decisions depending on the culture, the risk aversion, the own strategies and goals and things they have. So there's a lot of assumptions they need to learn and then pretend they're actually, from a competitor, say from Tesla.
Yeah. I mean, and that is in a way a crucial point. So one part of that is having like sound analytical research on the company that you're
Mm.
representing. Um, One would also try to kind of get into the soft factors, that sometimes also includes having material in the breakout rooms where those teams are with the company, if with products, marketing material, and so forth, so that they can stronger immerse into that role. However,
Mhm.
that usually works quite well. Um, Sometimes you also, I mean, you have people in the company that come from those competitors.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that
I was just saying
that
that.
usually
Yeah.
helps. And then
Yeah.
you have that usually have that competitive dynamic in the room, that managers actually enjoy then being in that different role, and in a way competing against the company they work for, have maybe worked for quite some time. And that actually creates then quite a dynamic. And my experience is that usually um, the structured comparison of competitive intelligence also already is a benefit for many, because
Mhm.
often one would find many information about competitors being spread across an entire organization, but not kind of put together. And that already helps really to get into that role.
What are some of the boundaries and the rules of a game? Because literally, um, being a manager, let's take the example just for the sake of having a tangible example. I'm okay working at Audi, and now I'm representing a manager, say from Tesla. I could go and simply say, well, I'm imposing that diesel is getting banned. We're at Tesla are so good at electromobility. We're going to win the game. Done. It's like a 30-minute game. Yeah, obviously, that's not how it should work and how it's supposed to work. So, are there some boundaries, rules where the teams actually need to adhere to?
Yes. So, I mean, what you usually do is with the game book and the material that is in there, you kind of, in a way, already set the boundaries of the simulation. And
Mhm.
then there is a control team where people like I would sit in. And the aim of the control team is also kind of to make sure that it doesn't get completely wild. Um, and that you, for instance, make sure that competitors or the competing teams can't just make up external events or anything like that. That would be then
Yeah.
provided by the control team, for instance, to kind of avoid things like that. So always trying to find that balance between stretching the thinking of the participants without getting too wild out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's a referee or somebody who actually
In a way.
takes
Yeah.
care about. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Now imagine the business war game from the perspective of a manager. So how is it? How does it play out for them? How do managers typically react? For example, when you tell them, "Hey, tomorrow you're going to engage in a role play." What does their day look like? Do they know in which team they are prior to starting the day? How would I experience a
Mhm.
business war game as a manager being invited to it?
Well, one would usually try to, like weeks before, have like a 30-minute call with the
Mm.
participating managers to kind of introduce the concept so that they are aware of that, and also take a bit away of the concerns one would have around, playing something over the course of the day or being in a role play simulation. And then usually, for me, the ideal setup is if I can have something like an evening before the war game where everybody comes together and they can get together in their groups and like have a first discussion. Okay, tomorrow will not
Mhm.
going to be the usual manager and the company. We're going to be in a way in a different company, and that they kind of go to bed with that idea and wake up in the next morning and say, okay, this is now going to be a different day. And then that is in a way supported with having a room with the material in there, sometimes with the logos being on caps or even on
Mhm.
t-shirts, so that they kind of feel attached to that company they're assigned to. And then it really starts in the morning with, okay, here's your analytical material. This is your breakout room with some marketing material. Maybe have a look at a few of the videos to get an idea of the tonality, also of the culture, and
Mhm.
then start working together. And then usually what happens is that it is in a way very intense day of discussions around trends, scenarios, futures, strategy,
Mhm.
and competition. And it usually is something that I, as a participating manager, really, really enjoy. So usually time flies by really, really quickly, and engaging in that. And of course, most of the time, the participating managers want to win. They want to be in the winning team. Doesn't matter then even more if they're competing against their own company or not. They want to be in the
Yeah.
winning team.
Yeah. And what does winning mean? Is it literally putting the other company out of business? Is it like I want to strive for a checkmate? I want to make sure they lose as much market share as they have. Is it that quote unquote simple of a goal? Is it more complex?
It, it
What is it?
it in a way depends on the setup. Can be also about
Mm,
what team is being more innovative than the others, but it can also be the one that is
okay.
gaining more market share than the others. It depends also a bit on what type of effort has been put into maybe developing a quantitative model
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
evaluates the results and gives the feedback. But it is, I would say that that idea of winning is more something that kind of is motivating. Um, it, I think it plays a certain role in the simulation that say, okay, that team did in particular well, maybe even given that they had a difficult competitor they were simulating. Um, but then at the end, it is really bringing together the diverse perspectives. But the momentum of winning is something that motivates. Uh, the participating managers.
Yeah, of course. Is there any I don't know, descriptive or prominent case study that you could share? One specific example where we could, what was the goal? How did the days or day look like? Um, Anything you can guide us through a story
Yeah,
of a specific war game.
I mean, from an academic perspective, the difficult issue is that nobody really wants to talk about a business war
Of
game to
course.
anybody from the outside because it's really about, in a way, the strategy. I mean, the own strategy being challenged all the time in such a simulation. I still find one case study really, really nice, which has been published, and that's the one of Swissair. And I mean, the story there is an interesting one, because Swissair not only, when bankrupt, was then sold to the German Lufthansa, and that in Switzerland back then caused quite some debate, and a lot
Mhm.
of was published on that. But that's an interesting case, and can walk you through that uh, briefly. So, I mean, what happened in the 90s is that the massive deregulation of the European airline industry, which led to the creation of the alliances we know of today. Um,
Mhm.
and Swissair back then had created an own a small alliance and was thinking about, so how should they move forward? Should they join a larger alliance like the Lufthansa Star Alliance? Should they remain independent? And the question also was for them, what would be critical success factors in the future? Um, but also preparing the own management in a way for change to be able to compete maybe with the larger alliances. And they simulated the industry for the next 10 years in 3 iterations, as I just described it, and 10 years into the future. And the outcome obviously was that the participating managers felt that Swissair should join one of the large alliances. The One World
Mhm.
Alliance seemed to be the choice they had back then from British Airways. And it turned out that the CEO more kind of had a perspective on saying, okay, no, the own qualifier group, the own alliance of Swissair was the right approach. It's more a branding, marketing issue, and felt actually more that the strategy he was convinced of should be the one they should go forward with. And it turned actually out that the participating managers anticipated quite well the dynamics of their industry, and then a few years later, Swissair actually went bankrupt because they had the wrong strategy. And I think it's a in the twofold perspective, it's a nice case because it kind of, on the one hand side, emphasizes that leadership should, in a way, embrace the opinions and respect the opinions they have with their management team. But on the other hand, that the simulation did a quite good job in roughly anticipating how the industry would further evolve.
So, in essence, It was a wrong decision by the CEO back then to stick to the strategy. So why did he engage in the business wargaming in first place? Just to ratify that his strategy is already the best, or
It seemed in hindsight that it was more about ratifying and like
uh,
having the momentum of having everybody together and saying, okay, this is the right path.
mhm.
And then that simulation obviously developed differently, and it came to a different to a different conclusion in a way.
Interesting. That makes me think of the what do participants actually learn? What are some of the most impactful lessons that they learn? For example, by the managers, maybe also the CEO, depending on the participants, obviously. Does it change? Does it at least have an impact on their approach to the strategy, the tactics they use, their leadership, even based on your experience, do you think they leave the room as a different person or at least a different manager than they entered the day?
I believe so, and I think what they really learn is uh, changing a perspective on the own industry, on the own company, and engaging deeply with changes in their industry, like and that that deep engagement with trends and maybe even scenarios. So I think that is in a way a change, and having that interaction with their colleagues over the course of the day. I think that really that makes a difference.
Because I think if you go into a business war game, you're very much convinced of maybe their own strategy you have, depending if it's a corporate strategy or just a product strategy or whatever is part of the business war game. And then you find out through engaging with some of the trends and maybe scenarios you've put together and maybe even a quantitative model that you can, of course it's a model and models always are not perfect, but they can help in understanding some aspects and maybe some dependencies. So you go out and say, well, actually, this is interesting because I thought we have the best winning strategy, but if competitor A makes a certain move and competitor B is kind of maybe just buying competitor A and then they join forces, and then our strategy is basically worthless or at least not a winning strategy anymore. Now, this probably leads to a realization and maybe a shift in strategy. Over the years, have there been any unexpected outcomes you've witnessed, like a surprise, something you say, "Well, I didn't know that that was coming."
You mean on how a war game evolved? And
Yeah, for example, did somebody start to cry? Something very unexpected where you say, "Well, Jesus, I never thought this is going to happen."
well, I think I had several times that moments that, for instance, participants would say, you know what, we've been focusing on competitor A all the time, but to be
Mhm,
honest, I don't think that A is really the issue. We'll be able to deal with
mhm.
A, but if B or C evolves, or if we have like a completely new type of competitor, this will hit us really hard. I think those are kind of the revelations that I found several times really really interesting. That there was that moment that said, okay, now we better understand maybe also to what to focus on.
And I imagine the stakes are pretty high, right? So if you have senior executives, they've seen a lot. They've gone through many strategic exercises, and in most of the cases, of course, they at least they think they know quite what's going on in terms of trends and maybe even competitive intelligence. So, from your experience, what does it take to make a business war game successful and also um, being accepted
Mhm.
by the
Yeah.
participants in the first place?
I mean, in a way, it starts out that you have maybe a leadership team which is open to having a joint discussion, and of course to have the openness to say, okay, there will be a team that will be representing our own company, and they might be starting with the strategy we have worked on maybe for quite some time, but they need to have the freedom to you know do it completely different then. So
Mhm.
then there needs to be that openness and willingness to engage together in such an exercise. And I think that's in a way the precondition so that something like that can be successful. Um, um, Often I've seen war games also being an opportunity to bring in different stakeholders, cross-hierarchical or cross-functional, within an organization. So there also needs to be that
Mhm.
openness and having those discussions that everybody can be heard, nobody is being voiced down. And if those conditions in a way exist, then I think business war games can be pretty successful.
Do they show up, or do they just send their representatives sometimes?
Um, No, I mean, it depends. If this is something that is, sponsored by the CEO, then everybody will show up who
Mhm.
is invited.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, of course, that's also a strong signal saying, okay, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not the type of leader that knows everything. I'll be, working on this together. Um, and I think then most of the time, often people are also just curious. If they've never been in one of
Mhm.
those exercises, they're interested in. Okay, I'll have a look. I'll figure out what it's about. And the format often I find also just attracts people saying, okay, I'll never heard about that, or I heard about it but never participated in one. So I'll be joining something like that.
Yep. Yep. I agree. So of course it's maybe easier to get participation rates up if it's supported by top level management or senior
Yeah,
executives, for sure.
yeah.
Are you already using AI in business wargaming? Is there a role of artificial intelligence, more specifically maybe generative artificial intelligence, because it's maybe an interesting way to synthesize trends, come
Mm.
up with some scenarios that may or may not be likely, with a high or low likelihood. Is it already being used, and if so, how?
I haven't used it yet. I'm not aware yet of any examples, but I
Mhm.
could could picture that being helpful, in particular when it comes to maybe better understanding or quickly understanding certain aspects of a competitor you're representing. I could see there being a lot of potential. Um, I think in general, as it is with the question of how can AI, for instance, be used in foresight, where do you need kind of the
Mhm.
interaction between participants and those discussions and those moments of learning, and where can AI support? But there's certainly, I think there's certainly opportunities for including AI into war games.
Because if you think about it, I think it would be interesting, because you could literally design, um, AI agents that represent a competitor with certain goals in mind. So you could, simply go ahead, use a large language model, maybe just the existing ones, even an open source one if you want, and then give it specific tasks like, you are, in the case of Swissair, for example, you're a competitor. This is where you want to go. This is all the trends, and this is basically how you, as a competitive company, the goals you want to achieve. And instead of having a team of humans, or in addition, not instead, but maybe in addition, of having human teams, also involve a couple of certain agents with specific goals and tasks, and let them even interact with each other. I mean, that's kind of possible with the technology we have. And then you go, well, there is maybe also an artificial intelligence player representing a company, or representing
Mm,
political decisions, or something that's projected throughout the game, um, and maybe even challenge even the company, for example, in that case, Swissair, provide them with assistance, AI assistance, maybe an agent, or as said, as competitors. I think that would be an interesting thing to do, because it could bring new dynamics to the game, um,
yeah,
in business wargaming.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So this, I would love to experiment with that. Yes, I agree that could be really interesting. In particular, as I've also seen in the past attempts to kind of train AI to take a certain perspective and to represent a certain perspective. So I think that could be really
Yeah,
interesting. Yes, I agree.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's all these things that are being trained right now to put in, for example, put an AI in a consumer,
Mhm.
in the shoes of a consumer. Would you like this product? Yada yada. If you were a 40-year-old male with 2 kids living in Miami, whatever, yeah, would you maybe, and then the AI comes up with, yeah, my kids go to school, so this would be helpful, la la la, la, with some basic reasoning. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree.
With all the business war games that you have led, what would be your recommendations to leaders and innovators out there if they haven't been engaged in a business war game yet?
Um, I think it has really several benefits which make it attractive, and I think for one, it is really an opportunity to bring together a lot of aspects around, be it the future of your industry, trends, scenarios, but also the competitive aspect. And I think merging all of that into a workshop format, maybe over the course of a day, which people tend to enjoy because it is engaging. I think that is really something which is very beneficial. And in particular, if we talk about organizations that, for instance, have done work on trends and foresight and have competitive information, it kind of brings everything together, and it then allows for a very structured discussion around the future of my company and the future of my industry.
Are there any things that work better in this, so any scenarios or goals that work better in business war games, like the entire corporate strategy or specific parts of the product strategy? Should they go for, the large overarching strategy, or very narrow and specific scenarios they want to test? What have you found being more effective?
Um, I think it gets in a way more tangible and more effective if I can, boil it down a bit. I'm saying, okay,
Hmm.
we're
Hmm.
not doing like corporate strategy, but we're doing strategy for a business unit,
Yeah.
for a certain market segment. That gets an more tangible, and you derive probably more concrete ideas and proposals out of a war game. However, if you kind of are on a corporate level, it probably is then more of having like an overarching idea of where the industry could head to. Maybe also you know, what are in a way things that I need to change or reasons to transform. It depends a bit about what you want to achieve, but if it if it gets more tangible, that of course kind of then leads to more concrete discussions then in a war game.
Yeah. So, Jan, this has been a fantastic, a very insightful conversation. Thank you very much for this. Um, and before the conversation ends, we do have a new tradition on this podcast. So, my previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing what we're going to talk about. So, there's a question for
Okay.
you, from my last guest, and the question goes like this: If you had the power to halt all AI development worldwide, but choose one specific area where AI still progresses, what would that area be and why?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Oh my God. Um, One specific area and why? Um, I mean, I'm so I'm also an academic, so I think I'm really helping within creating academic knowledge. I would find that really interesting to kind of
Mhm.
have as much as support as possible to understand what is out there in a structured way. I think that could really elevate academic research further. I would find that really fascinating if that would be the one thing that could be further developed.
That's very powerful. I very much like it. So to help advance
Yeah,
science,
help
and
advance
yeah,
science. Yeah.
that's pretty strong. And I mean that there is literature coming out right now that is basically arguing that there is some diminishing returns on scientific progress in the recent decade or so, because there has been a lot of progress specifically, 70s, 80s, 90s, also coming from the military space. And then you had the internet and machine learning and all the mathematics and physics. But right now it seems a little bit, that, and nobody knows why, by the way. Um, and the question is it because, you know, things are being repeated, but there is no groundbreaking discoveries being made anymore? Could an AI help actually with more groundbreaking discoveries and then help accelerate
Mhm.
how we progress with science in any area? So, okay, I understand. I think where you're coming from. That's pretty powerful. Yeah, I love that. Well, that's it for this episode. Jan, thank you very much again for being my guest. It was really interesting. It was a pleasure listening to you.
Thanks a lot for having me, indeed.
And to our listeners, if you have not subscribed yet to this podcast, please go ahead and do so. It is a small thing and it will help us continue to make the show better. So, our promise to you is that we'll continue to do our best to deliver exceptional value at no cost to you. So, if you're already subscribed, thank you. If not, please go and subscribe now. Thanks for listening. Take care and bye bye.